This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm Jessica Beatty. In the past week, we've seen how censorship in China can affect free speech in the United States. Last Friday, Daryl Morey, the general manager for the Houston Rockets, tweeted his support for the Hong Kong protesters. And the Chinese regime was not very happy about that. Several Chinese entities retaliated by cutting ties with the Rockets. Morey deleted his tweets on Sunday and apologized, while the NBA distanced themselves from Morey in a statement. But that backfired in the United States, and many people called out the NBA for putting money over the freedom of speech. So the NBA issued another statement on Tuesday, trying to smooth things over with both sides. In contrast to the NBA's handling of censorship in China is South Park. In a recent episode, one of the characters is jailed during a visit to China, and he's sent to a Chinese Communist Party re-education center where he meets Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, which is funny because in 2017, pictures of Winnie the Pooh were actually banned in China because people were saying that Winnie the Pooh looked like Chinese leader Xi Jinping. So now, most South Park episodes are unavailable online in China. South Park writers Trey Parker and Matt Stone issued a mock apology on Twitter. It said, quote, "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. Xi doesn't look just like Winnie the Pooh at all. Long live the great Communist Party of China." End quote. Today we have China expert Sean Lin on the show to hear what he has to say about all this. We'll also discuss the most recent Hong Kong news and what he thinks about pulling U.S. troops from Syria. Sean, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Jess.
So could you update us on what happened in Hong Kong in the past week with the mask ban?
Yes, so the mask ban was initiated last week by the Hong Kong SAR government, and it was actually a new approaches under the emergency law that the Hong Kong government want to adopt at this time. So basically, under this emergency law, Hong Kong government have all these authorities, including martial laws, including news scrutinies, including taking away people's properties and internet censorship, all these different restrictions under the emergency situation. So the mask ban was just the initial approach that the Hong Kong SAR government pushed out last weekend. So it immediately triggered a huge response from Hong Kong as well from international communities. Because this approach, even though the Hong Kong government tried to say we're learning from the Western democratic countries, we are following the Canadian, versions of mask bans, but it's basically most of Western countries still regarding this is Chinese Communist central government's hardline tactics being pushed out into Hong Kong, and especially when everyone's so clear that the Chinese central government is very keen on getting more information or collecting more information on the protesters, especially when they are now has advanced technology on facial recognitions. So definitely they want to identify all those young protesters, those young protesters. And so they would like to get the information and then find right timing to arrest people and then also probably put them away in the jail or detention centers. And so these mask bans actually further infuriate a lot of the young protesters. And also we see last weekend in Hong Kong, people from all the 18 districts in Hong Kong went on the street to protest against the government's mask ban. And the Democratic legislative members also filed a complaint to the Hong Kong's High Court, saying that the current Hong Kong SAR governments, they are bypassing the regular legislation procedures, and it's against the Hong Kong fundamental law, or you can say Hong Kong basic laws. So the High Court rejected the Democratic legislative members' appeal, but they say they will do another legal review at the end of the month. However, these claims may be just a way to ease up the tension, but right now, definitely still the only hope the Hong Kong people get to rescind this mask ban. So the situation in Hong Kong is very, very tough. Yeah. So right now, I think a few other phenomena that we need to pay close attention to in Hong Kong. One thing is many supermarkets under the control, under the empire of the most richest Hong Kong tycoon, Li Jiacheng. So those market like Baijia supermarket and also other market like Hui Kang supermarket, 7-Elevens, hundreds of these supermarkets has closed over the weekend. And so this is kind of like a strike by the business sectors in Hong Kong. So we see some of these Hong Kong originated business community maybe try to say no to the central government, or say no to this or say no to this mask ban. So I think this situation we need to closely watch, see how deeply or how widely the business communities in Hong Kong will engage in the defiance of the central government's hard tactics. And then also, we need to pay attention to if the Hong Kong SAR government may push out additional restriction for Hong Kong people to withdraw money from the banks. There are certain banks have taken measures to limit the amount of money that people withdraw on the ATM machine. But I think a lot of worry, concern in the community will push more people to transfer their money to banks outside Hong Kong, or change the currency they hold. They maybe switch from Hong Kong currency to a US dollar. And so I think the central government won't leave this wave. So I think the central government and also the Hong Kong SAR government won't let these ties getting stronger. So I think they will take additional measure on this end. And as well, we saw news reports in mainland China that the Chinese central government probably is mobilizing some of the main state-owned enterprises to do more investment in Hong Kong, investing in Hong Kong-based large enterprises in order to get better control of Hong Kong's business community. So I think the central government is taking different measures to further control the Hong Kong communities. So I think it's a very challenging situation, and also the police brutalities will continue to rise up. And my biggest concern is that the SAR government or the Chinese central government may set up a stage play, a scandal, kind of like when they attacked the Falun Gong group. They set up the self-immolation in Tiananmen Square in 2001, and the Chinese central government using this as an excuse for them to justify the persecution of Falun Gong. I'm worried that the Chinese communist regime will further escalate the tension in Hong Kong by using more police brutality, triggering more fighting back from the protesters, and then they were using the excuses to crash down the protest, and they may even set up some, these stage plays to blame the young protesters. So I'm worried this situation may come true soon, and especially after the October 1st national celebration. So the Chinese central government will try to, using all kinds of tactics, try to quench the fire in Hong Kong as soon as possible. So I think they are definitely incubating something right now, especially when the Hong Kong police forces heavily mixed with the mainland armed police. Now the Hong Kong overall police number already increased more than 12,000. So I think half of them probably all from mainland China. So it's very challenging situation because the Hong Kong police pretty much are directly controlled by the central government, and even the Hong Kong SAR government may not have any say in the operation of the Hong Kong police. So that's why I think the situation there will getting worse in the near future.
Coming up next, China's backlash against the NBA. So on Friday, the Rockets general manager tweeted out support for Hong Kong's freedom movement, and then that raised tensions between China and the NBA. I wondered if you could comment on this.
Yeah, so the situation has the situation is kind of like a big drama because originally it was a simple tweet from the general manager for the Houston Rockets, but the response from the Chinese society was totally out of proportions because I think the central government must see it as a great opportunity to show its influence, its power, because NBA has a huge market in China, and through broadcasting NBA games, through having games inside China, through some joint training program for young basketball players, and also advertisements and merchandise. So NBA has a huge market interest in, not just interest, yeah, it's probably, we can say NBA has a huge profit as well. So NBA has a huge market interest and profit in China. So we know that even just through some of the NBA ads and mobile games, NBA brands has more than 100 million followers in China. That's why it's a huge market for NBA, and Chinese government must feel this is a situation they can fully show their powers, and they feel that the NBA will not dare to publicly against the Chinese government, facing the risk they will lose the whole mainland China market. So I think they mobilize. So I think the Chinese government mobilized some of the stars in China, like Yao Ming, who used to play in Rockets, and because he leads Chinese basketball, like union basketball. You can say this. What's the word? Sorry. So Yao Ming kind of leads the Chinese basketball committees. So Yao Ming and the Chinese basketball committees condemned the Houston Rockets, and then some of the business, or you can say the sponsors for NBA in China, some of those sport sponsors, they withdrew from their support on Houston Rockets. And then the government, of course, mobilized the internet servers, some of those, we call it the 50 cents parties, basically the internet armies the Chinese government employed to attack on Houston Rockets. So you see strong waves of criticisms on the Houston Rockets. And then the Houston Rockets general manager, NBA commissioners, and as well as stars, James Harden's in Houston Rockets, they all came out to apologize. So I think it's amazing that so quickly the whole kind of NBA chains quickly bow down to the pressure from the Chinese Communist regime. So it's a sad situation, but it also shows how strongly Chinese Communist regime can mobilize different resources to put pressure on the foreign enterprises in China. And I think it's a double-edged sword that the Chinese government didn't realize. Of course, they can, show people, now we have such influence on U.S. Business, U.S. enterprise. But at the same time, I think it will let more people know that the Chinese government is basically using the market, using the economy to taken away people's freedom of speech, even in democratic countries. So I think it will make more Westerners feel the threat from the Chinese government. I think in a certain sense, this is kind of like the Chinese government's display of the militaries on October 1st on Tiananmen Square. Of course, it can be exaggerated demonstration of the military force for the Chinese Communist Party, but at the same time, it's a huge alert for the Western country to see the Chinese rapid growth of their military and see some of their threatening weapons. So I think this time when they're showing such influence on the NBA, a large enterprise in the United States, I think it's also an alarm for more American people as well as some of the politicians to understand the Chinese government's tactic to win influence globally. And I think more American people will be totally upset on the situation. And it's also kind of ridiculous as a contrast because, in United States, the NBA, the NFL players, they can be against some of the U.S. policies and all the media can report about it. And, people overall feel, the players have a right to show their different opinions on the U.S. government's policy. And none of them have to immediately apologize. No such, pressure. And there were huge debates in the U.S. community societies for a long time. But now a U.S. businessman just make a simple comment on the Hong Kong situation, and it can trigger the whole NBA. It can trigger the whole Chinese government's response to this NBA enterprise. So it's really kind of ridiculous. So I think it's also an opportunity for people to see what is my, conscience, what is my fundamental value on this kind of situation. Am I just in China for making profit, or am I actually wish Chinese people have a better future without a dictatorship? I think so. It's a testing of people's conscience actually in this kind of situation.
Coming up next, is pulling U.S. troops out of Syria common sense or a mistake? So this week, President Trump announced that they were starting to withdraw troops from Syria and handing over everything to Turkey, including the burden of prisoners. So there's been a lot of backlash Could you give us your take on what's going on there?
So basically, just Syria situation is so complicated. There are so many players, so many factors involved in Syria situation. You have the Turkish factor, you have the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Force. They are the Kurdish group, and then you also have Iran's influence in there. You have the current Assad regimes in Syria. You have Russians influencing there, and you have U.S. forces in there, and so there are so many different forces, also including UN's and European Parliament's influence in that region as well. So it's a very complicated issue because Syria already had the Syria civil war, right? And it also has a war against the Islamic State, and then they are also have the different sector tensions in Syria. And also, even the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Force itself, is one of the main forces inside the SDF. Is the YPG, which is linked to a group that have a long time war with the Turkish government. So it's just such a complicated situation. And U.S. has been thinking about withdrawing from Syria, right? Since last year, when Trump first mentioned about withdrawing from Syria, but to withdraw from Syria, definitely the current administration facing strong criticisms, resistance even from its own cabinet members. So I think this is one of the main reasons the former Secretary of State Mattis resigned, and probably also another main reason that John Bolton also left the administration. And because I think one of the biggest concerns is that if the United States withdraw from Syria, what will happen to the ISIS forces still in there? Because even though ISIS is being defeated on many of the caliphate locations, but there are still about 30,000 ISIS fighters at large in Syria. So will ISIS resurge? So this is the biggest question. And even there are now thousands of Islamic State fighters being incarcerated in different prisons in northern Syria. And will they break out and then trigger another major growth of the terrorist group? So this is a really core question for this whole issue. And people don't want another repeat of the emergence of the ISIS when U.S. Withdrew from Iraq in 2011. It was under Obama administration. So that's why I think everybody's worried about that U.S. withdrawal from Syria will really display a void that the ISIS can take this opportunity to grow again. And at the same time, and the Iran forces in Syria, or Iran-backed militia forces, or Russia-backed militia forces in Syria may also quickly take the void that the United States withdrawal can leave to this region. So it will be another big mess as well. But that doesn't mean right now it's not a mess. It's also a mess right now. And so the United States tried to mediate a negotiation between the Turkish government, between the Erdogan regime with the SDF, try to establish a safe zone in the northeast of the Syria. But obviously, the negotiation failed. The current situation overwhelmingly criticized Trump on this decision is a little bit unfair because it's hard to find a solution for Syria right now. But we also need to keep in mind, because the U.S. presence in the whole region is still tremendous. The whole infrastructure, the whole military infrastructure the United States employ in the whole region is still very strong. And, even without any force on the ground, U.S. naval force is so strong. I think everyone still understands the U.S. will have a big say in the region as well.
Yeah, and President Trump campaigned on bringing U.S. troops home, so looks like he's trying to keep that promise.
Yeah, he's trying to keep his promise on the land. And I think another important thing is that, especially with the new Joint Chief of Staff, General Mike Milley, new focus on China and Russia. And so I think Trump's tried to still focus on the Indo-Pacific strategy, the defense against China's aggressions. So, because General Milley clearly said, for the coming few decades, China will be the primary challenge for the United States. So I think he may be a supporter for the Trump's withdrawal from Syria. He could be. We're not sure yet. But overall, I think overall, Trump feel he had a big trade war with China. He needed to put a lot of focus on that. And he doesn't want the war in Afghanistan, in Syria to last forever and costing American people lives and end up nowhere. And still a lot of sectoral, regional, religious conflict in that regions. And U.S. force presence cannot keep, supporting different groups inside the region and then always facing the jeopardy, like one time this group is a partner on one war, and then the next time you may have to betray them again because they have another conflict of interest. So I think it's just such a difficult situation in Middle East and in Afghanistan. So I think Trump had this long time vision of his own. He want to withdraw from the region and focus on the Indo-Pacific region and deal with China, and also in Europe deal with Russia. So that's why he also tried to make NATO's stronger again, urging more European countries to contribute more on the NATO's budget. So I think he has his own focus. That's why he still want to withdraw from Syria, even though for more than half a year now he is facing a strong resistance for his decision to withdraw from Syria.
Thank you so much, Sean, for joining us. And as always, it's great to have your perspective on all these issues.
All right, thank you.
So what do you think about pulling U.S. troops out of Syria? You can let us know what you think on Twitter or Facebook at AD Top Story of the Day. Once again, I'm Jessica Beatty. Thanks for listening to America Daily.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.